Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Marieka Calhoun. I am a peer tutor at the Kurt Vonnegut Writing Center at Shortridge High School. So I started tutoring this academic year, and I've been really excited to dive into it and kind of learn all about it. I'm maybe not as versed as some others, but I've had a lot of fun, and um, there was a lot of interesting research I did for this, so I'm excited to get into it with you all. So, multimodal learning and tutoring. What does that mean? So, the learning modes are literary, auditory, kinesthetic, and visual. We're all somewhat familiar with these, and some of them maybe in our heads apply a little more to tutoring, some a little less. So, let's look at that. In tutoring, you're probably first going to be thinking of literary and auditory, right? Because we're writing centers, there's going to be written assignments and rubrics. You're doing literary texts, you're writing essays. Many students, their research materials are going to be either books or online databases. It's all literary. And when you're coming into the writing center, there's going to be those auditory elements of having conversations, and some students might use text-to-speech to listen to their research materials. Those are the most typical modes I think one would come to mind immediately when considering modes in tutoring. But our other two modes, kinesthetic and visual, also actually have a great role to play when it comes to tutoring to our best ability. Off the top of the brain, one might think of having physical notes, taking notes during a tutoring session for the student, the tutoring space itself, that plays a big role. Those are all physical, kinesthetic things that are involved in tutoring. And of course, visuals, graphic organizers, or if a student is creating a presentation to supplement their work, those are visual elements of that academic project. But there are more ways for us to utilize these visual and kinesthetic elements that can be very creative and help us to assist students who maybe aren't as comfortable with the traditional setup of the Writing Center, students who aren't inclined towards the auditory or the literary. We can use visual and kinesthetic aid to support them in new and exciting ways, and become better and more creative tutors. So I have a couple examples that I've compiled from some research and from my own experience that I'm going to go through and explain how they might be applied to start us off. And then later in our presentation, I'll talk about who we might be most assisting with these, but do remember these are all universally helpful, and there's no student that is not gonna be able to be assisted by these. It's all case by case, but these are all great tools to apply. So to start, the mind map. This is a great simple tool that we can use. I do encourage to have a student do this on paper to get that kinesthetic aspect, but also because then they don't lose it and they have it with them and it's in their mind. So a mind map is essentially a way to visualize thoughts. So instead of having to immediately convert your thoughts into words, the student can kind of splay it out on some paper and really think through what they want to do. So in the example image I have up here, this student has been assigned by the history teacher to write a personal choice essay. So they get to choose their topic, but it has to be historical. In this context, the student might come in and say, I'm really struggling to come up with an idea. So we take a look at the rubric and we break it down from there. So shooting off in the larger bubbles, we have the 4 key aspects of the rubric the student's been assigned: their grammar, their analysis, their personal connection, and their organization. From here, you can encourage your student to consider not only just the aspects of the assignment, the things they have to include, but all the different ways they can include them that is going to best suit them and make them the most excited that they can be about their assignment. So they can think about the different ways they can organize based on timeline or based on the subject matter. And they can ideate and think about what are the things I'm interested in. And what this does for a student is it lets them think about everything they want to do without the pressure of getting it right immediately. It often can help kids get excited, and one important thing it does is it helps the student to know exactly what the rubric is asking them. This is a very useful tool because a rubric is going to be a literary mode, and if a student struggles to connect with that, using this visual element, you can essentially translate the requirements of a assignment into a mode that is more clear for the student. So that's a really good tool to have. Color and highlighting is another useful visual tool. This is more useful in the editing process. What you do here is you're essentially just going to break down whatever key aspects you're looking for in the paper or the assignment. So in this one, I have an excerpt from an essay about Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House. And so I've cut it up into summary, symbolism, author's purpose, and quotes. So if the student is supposed to be writing an essay analyzing the intentions of Henrik Ibsen, we can look at it visually and see, oh, there's not a lot of that purple in there. And the student can be curious about how can I summarize less and analyze more. So it's a very useful tool for students to simplify the steps they need to take. And it also gives them a tool that they can continue to use through any assignment. It's a great way for if you have a kid who struggles to proofread, if the student is not quite sure about how to identify if their writing is meeting the brief. Using color and highlighting, it's very versatile. You can use it to check anything you need in the writing. This also helps students to recognize their own biases in their work, areas that they need to grow in. So if a student consistently is highlighting their work and discovering that they are not including enough quotes for the requirements of their assignments, or they tend to paraphrase a lot, summarize a lot, those are things that they can then recognize visually and keep in mind. Our next example is cutting and pasting. This one's quite fun, I think. So this is much more kinesthetic, but it can be done in a digital space if that's best for the student. So this is another editing process technique. So you start with the first draft the student has, and you identify certain sections. So depending on where the student is at with their writing, this might be easier or harder. If they have labeled sections, you can cut those out. Or if it's more run-on sentences, it might be harder to identify exactly where the student wants to cut things off. But that's something you'll go through with the student. And this can be done on a paragraph level as well. And then you can cut those physically into pieces. And the student can move those pieces around to identify, read through it, what sounds the best. And you can encourage the student to read aloud, because it's important to recognize as well that the modes work best in tandem. So the more of these that you can get the student engaged with, the more engaged they will be with the work as a whole. So this allows the student to consider the development of their paper and the flow of their paper on their own, with your support to, affirm that they're making smart decisions and that their paper is sounding good. So this is very supportive of the student's experience and their opinions. And it also helps the student to, again, learn things about writing that will last. For my last example here, I have the simplification of key concepts. This is very broad, and we can be very creative with this and apply this in fun ways. So simpler, you can think of the hamburger paragraph that I think a lot of us have seen before with the topic, sentence, body, 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 conclusion. But we can get more unique and more tailored to student experience. The simplification of key concepts is not only about saying things in a way the student understands, it's also about showing the student that you're listening to them and that you care about them as a person, which is going to make them more inclined to put effort into their writing, even if they're not feeling at their best. So, at the bottom here, I have an example of turning concepts into formulas. Some students this works better for. Like personally, this wouldn't be the best translation for me, but there are a lot of students that have that kind of piece by piece view of what they're making. So when you know the checklist, essentially, you can understand what you need to do. So this formula shows you how to make anaphora if they're writing a poem. So they can understand those maybe complicated words, complicated subjects in a way that is tailored to them. Up at the top right, I have a little diagram. It may be cliche, but sports metaphors do work. If you're trying to have a student understand the hierarchy of the things they need to get done, maybe they're running late on an assignment, you can explain to them that grammar is only a layup and the thesis is a 3-point shot, and they'll understand, oh, that's what I need to do. So, and listening to that and being aware of who the student you're tutoring is and what they need, and being willing to be creative and maybe be a bit silly in the way you explain things really works to connect them and make them more excited to write, because writing becomes less rigid and a safer space. So those are all my examples. There's tons of ways we can incorporate visuals into tutoring and kinesthetic modes into tutoring. But now I've given you all these tools. Who are we applying them to? How is this benefiting us and the learners we're supporting? Well, like I said previously, this is universal, and I do believe that these techniques are a way that you can support everyone who comes into your writing center. But there are two specific demographics that I'm going to talk to you about, because I think that they are especially inclined and oftentimes to be assisted by the use of multimodal tutoring. So first, I will be talking to you all about English language learners. Um, this may, of course, seem obvious at first. If you're not familiar with the language, literary aspects of the language, auditory aspects of the language are going to be harder to understand, but it gets a little bit more nuanced than that. So by using visuals and kinesthetics in your tutoring of ELL students, you're not only being able to communicate with them, you are supporting their language learning. So you're simplifying things, which makes it a lot less scary to work on something in a language that you don't fully know. And that creates motivation to keep learning. Allowing students to use the mind map and things like this helps you to recognize the terms that they don't understand and explain them further without that sense of the student having to admit something. A lot of ELL students I've worked with tend to not want to tell me that they're confused, because they are learning and they want to be doing a good job, and they are doing a good job, but it's also helpful when we can recognize things that can be explained further. So using these is a way to clarify terms without having to have that conversation at all. When you bring up a visual supplement to the words you're saying or the writing that has been written, you can directly support their understanding of the language by having a non-language based element involved. Again, it's going to also help to bring out the points of the assignment that the student isn't understanding. When we're working with the rubric in those ideation-based tools, the student is showing you their understanding of the rubric of the assignment, and then you can recognize where that matches and where there might be a discrepancy or an element that needs to be more directly pointed out. This also, being willing to apply these different techniques to a student who's learning the language, is going to make them feel more comfortable collaborating with you and feel more heard if they are struggling to tell you what they're feeling because they are not used to some of the academic language, maybe because it's not the same as their home language. The other group I want to talk about is students with learning disabilities. These students can be assisted by visual and kinesthetic modes for a variety of reasons. And I'm not only talking about one demographic, dyslexia, autism, ADHD, any mental health disability is really comes down to the fact that your brain isn't working maybe in exactly the same way as everyone else. And so by applying all of the modes, we're able to account for maybe a difference between us and support people who are different from us. So allowing students to use visuals to generate their ideas. Some students may be really overwhelmed by writing down their ideas because writing is difficult for them because of the way their brain works. And so you can prevent a student from feeling like they need to shut down and protect themselves and make them feel safe. Um, Letting students organize their works in different ways is a great way to support students with any of these learning disabilities. I've had students who they speak very eloquently to me, and I know that they know what they're saying. And the interesting thing is I see their writing and it's written exactly like their speech. So there's a, a level of sometimes students don't have the tools to organize in an academic manner. So allowing them to do that in a more creative way is very helpful. So, and by using notes and diagrams, you can support students who maybe are struggling to understand auditory input. It is seen across individuals with learning disabilities that auditory processing can sometimes be difficult. Students with dyslexia will struggle to hear the words you're saying. So supporting your auditory input with visual or literary input is a great way to strengthen your tutoring skills. So final thoughts. I think multimodal learning is a great way to make a more inclusive environment as we continue in our modern day through writing centers. I think allowing ourselves to be creative and come up with new ways to teach and to invite students to share their ideas is crucial. We're here because we care about other people and we enjoy our jobs. So allowing ourselves to try new things and to be a bit braver so that we can create safe spaces for other people is really a treasure. And so I think having all these tools and having new people making tools every day and getting to talk to you all is so exciting. And I think we should all be excited to be able to uh, teach in new ways and incorporate the visual and the auditory and the kinesthetic and the literary all together to take care of each other and produce our best work that we can. So that's that's what I have for you all today. I'm open to questions. The slideshow is connected through Shed. And if you need me to, I can also um, link it, I'm pretty sure. So thank you all so much. Yes, and I do have sources in there for you all.
Thank you, Marieka. Are there any questions that you have? I do have a question. I'm curious to know upon a tutor coming in and starting the tutoring session, is there any sort of question and answer period, or do they indicate on a form how they best prefer to learn? Like that strikes me as something that we haven't been doing in my own session, in my own center, but I know that there's a way that I could set it up. We are completely online. We could have them fill out in their form,
Right.
like, do you consider yourself a more visual or verbal or, kind of learner? So I'm wondering if you do any of that initially before you sort of sit down together.
Yeah, so when I'm working with students, I usually am not directly asking them how they prefer to learn because because when I talk to my friends, they don't know. But I am very analytical and I watch students and I see how they process the information, if they're taking notes or if they are like keeping a slide deck, however they're using their tools to keep track of their learning. And I try to lean that direction So it's kind of very much wading through it and seeing exactly based on my interpretation. But I do think being upfront with students as well is a useful tool to know how to spend our time best. Um, let's see, any questions in the chat? Yeah, apologies if I was using the wrong term, neurodivergent. I do hear people say that as well. I wasn't aware if that is the term to be using, but thank you. Do you see a value in technologies like a mind mapping app or website? Do you feel it lose some of its power if it's not a mechanical process? I think some students prefer digital spaces, especially nowadays. A lot of people are more used to it. There are a lot of like really robust websites for that kind of thing where you can move all of the things around. I haven't looked super far into them, but I think yeah, being willing to use whatever tool the student is most comfortable with is the way to go when we're using ideation and when we're trying to let people come up with their ideas. So yeah, I support digital versions as well. Um, yes, I will get that link. Thank you. Let's see. Here we go. Copy link. Hopefully, I don't know if it will work.
Here.
Okay.
You have to move.
So
Zoom is. And then you're gonna have to change it to view, but anyone could be, anyone with the link.
anyone with link of view, copy link.
Right.
Here we go. Are there particular strategies that you implement more frequently than others? Yes, that's more so just because I have in our writing center, people come to me planning more than they do revising. So a lot of the revision based stuff I don't get to use as much. I still think they're very useful, but I definitely do a lot more of those mapping out things. And I also utilize the simplification of concepts a lot. I explain things through metaphors a lot. That's also just kind of how my brain works, but those are applied more than the revision based ones simply because of the demographic I'm working with. Yes, so thank you all. Those were all wonderful questions. That's so fun. So it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Marieka, and thank you for sharing your slides. We'll go ahead and end this session, and everyone have a great day.
Alrighty, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Wanzi.